When I was 17, my friend George got attacked by something supernatural while I was there. Me and my buddies got really interested in Ouija boards towards the end of high school. We spent lots of nights together, crowded around one, moving the pointer thing. We had different experiences with it. Some were a bit weird or just seemed like luck. We often hung out in George's family garage, like many people do. It was dark, wet, and full of other weird stuff. George was interested in the Ouija board, just like the rest of us. But things changed when it seemed to focus on George. We asked it questions during our sessions, like who it was, what it wanted, and even silly things like guessing how many fingers we were holding behind our backs. We still weren't sure if it was real. We asked the spirit who they were, and they said they wanted to kill George. George got really scared, but he didn't want to look scared, so he kept going. In another session, we asked the same questions again. This time, a different spirit said it was the same one from before, and still wanted to hurt George. Because of the scary stuff that happened to George after those incidents, made him not want to join our Ouija board sessions anymore. But the rest of us were still curious and not ready to stop. So, on the final night we played with the Ouija board, we set up in George's garage like usual. George didn't want to join in, but he let us use his garage for our Ouija board session. It was just George, 2 girls and me that night. We turned off the lights and got everything ready. We even lit a couple of candles to make it more scary. George and one girl sat on one side, and the other girl and I sat on the opposite side. It was winter, so we all wore coats because the garage wasn't warm enough. The 3 of us were just starting with the Ouija board when suddenly George's coat sleeve caught on fire. I saw him waving his arm around, trying to put out the flame. I quickly turned on the lights, and George managed to extinguish the fire soon after. We all hurried out of the garage and went down to his basement. After we calmed down a bit, we focused on George. He took off his coat and insisted his arm was okay. We checked, and there wasn't a single mark on his skin. Then we looked at his coat sleeve, which was now charred. The burn was about the size of a fist and went through the layers of the coat, almost reaching the inner layer of cloth. The scariest part was definitely the shape on the coat, which looked like a goat's hoof. We hid the coat for a few days because we were scared, but then George and I decided to take it out again to try to explain what happened. Sadly, it didn't turn out how we hoped. We realized there were open flames in the room, and George had a cigarette in his hand, which could have caused the fire. We tried holding it against the other coat arm many times. We even used a lighter to create a similar flame, but no matter what we did, we couldn't make a burn that looked like a hoof. Eventually, I started wondering if George had purposely set up the whole thing to scare us away from using the Ouija board. He definitely had a reason to do it. It happened a decade ago, but George and I are still close friends. Sometimes I try to get him to admit what happened, but he always says the same thing. He loved that coat and was just as shocked and scared as we were. When my friends and I were in high school, we stumbled upon a Ouija board while browsing at Toys R Us. So we decided to give it a try and see if it could really communicate with spirits. Gathering in my basement, the 3 of us placed the board on the floor and began asking the typical questions you might see in horror movies or on paranormal TV shows. We began by saying hello and waited for the board to do something. The pointer piece, called the planchette, started moving slowly. I thought one of my friends was pushing it. They said they weren't. Then, when they let go, I felt the planchette moving by itself under my fingers. It felt strange, like a magnet was pulling it. We asked the board, "How many people are in the room with us?" It spelled out 4, even though there were only 3 of us. We continued, "Are you alive?" The planchette slowly moved to "No," sending a shiver down our spines. Jess, trying to break the tension, asked, "Are you nice?" The planchette returned to the middle of the board. The pointer moved back to "No," quickly and strongly. I felt the air get heavier and my heart raced. I started feeling scared, like I needed to run away or fight. Sarah asked, "What is your name?" in a very serious way. The pointer moved to one letter, then another, and another. The board started to spell out the name of a demon that I knew. While it was in the middle of spelling the name, I suddenly gasped and said the name out loud. Right at that moment, the planchette stopped moving completely. Then, a long black millipede came out from under my bed. It hurried over to the board and then left the room under the door. My friend screamed, and we rushed to put the board back in its box. We didn't know how to get rid of it properly because we heard that throwing it away or burning it could cause more trouble. So, we decided to keep it in the back of my garage. At that time, my garage was a separate building from my house. That night, we tried not to think too much about what happened, but we were still really scared. I slept with my grandmother's rosary next to my bed for several nights afterward, even though I'm not very religious. It's strange how things like that can make you feel safer. The next morning, my mom urgently called me outside. Near the front porch steps, we found a baby rabbit with its head chopped off. Its head lay next to its body. This was the first time something like this had ever happened to us. We lived near a city, so we didn't usually see wild animals around our house. The following week, I fell really ill. My temperature soared, and I was stuck in bed for days. It took weeks for me to recover fully, but strangely, my friends didn't get sick at all. It felt like I was the only one affected. After that sickness, things calmed down, but there were still odd occurrences. Whenever my dog went downstairs, they'd start shaking and darting back and forth. Whenever someone stayed in the basement, they always said it felt weird. They especially didn't like the dark hallway in the back. Almost everyone said they had nightmares when they slept there. Also, any small pets like fish, hermit crabs, or hamsters that lived in the basement died unexpectedly. So we decided it was better not to keep any pets down there anymore. This was strange because we'd never had any problems before. Our basement was nice, with plenty of sunlight and fresh air, and we'd had animals down there for over 10 years without any issues. This isn't my own story, it's about my stepdad. We were on vacation, and one day we started talking about ghosts and Ouija boards. He shared a really scary story about his encounter with a Ouija board. Here's what I remember from what he told me. One time, my stepdad's friend was really into Jack the Ripper. He got interested in talking to spirits with a Ouija board, so he got one and asked his parents to join him for a session. My stepdad and a couple of other friends went along too. His friend tried to contact the spirit of Jack the Ripper, and they actually got a reply. They made sure nobody was messing around, checking that no one was moving the planchette on purpose. His friend was overjoyed and started bombarding the spirit with questions. What my stepdad remembered clearly was that the spirit claimed to be the soul of a killer. It claimed to be Jack the Ripper, but then it said there were many killers before and after him. Then, someone asked if this spirit was alive in someone today. The board spelled out Dahmer. This happened 6 months before Jeffrey Dahmer became famous nationwide, so there's no way anyone was moving the planchette to spell out his name randomly. Nobody knew who Dahmer was back then. They didn't understand what it meant, so they stopped using the Ouija board, but his friend kept having more sessions with other friends and alone. He started feeling more and more scared. When Jeffrey Dahmer's name hit the news, he freaked out and called all his friends to tell them what happened. After that, they couldn't reach him anymore. They went to his house and found him hiding in his bedroom closet with a gun and a knife, really scared. His walls were covered in sticky notes, which he liked to use a lot. There were so many notes that they looked like wallpaper, and every single one said, "Jack's back." They helped him calm down a bit, and they got rid of the Ouija board, either by throwing it away or burning it. This story is about my wife's aunt, Sarah. I'm sorry if I can't tell you exactly how she felt, and sometimes I might not remember every little detail, because I heard this story from my wife. It happened about 10 to 15 years ago when Sarah got divorced. Her husband left, and Sarah stayed in the house alone for a while after that. The house was in a regular neighborhood, not isolated or anything like that. As Sarah got used to being alone, she started hearing strange noises coming from her attic. The creaks and thuds made her wonder what was going on up there. Worried, she called the police to check her attic thoroughly to see if someone might be living there without her knowledge. But when the police checked, they didn't find anything. They said it was probably just a raccoon or squirrel making the noise, but Sarah still felt uneasy. After the police left, she felt like the noises were getting even louder. She was sure it wasn't just a small animal. About a week later, she called the police again, but once more, they didn't find anything. A few days after she called the police again, Sarah came home from work earlier than usual. Luckily, she had been dating someone, and her boyfriend was with her when she arrived home. As she got out of her car in her garage, she noticed something strange and terrifying: a pair of muddy boots by the door. I like to think that if Sarah had been alone, she wouldn't have gone inside the house, but thankfully, her boyfriend was with her. They entered the house carefully and found a man standing naked in the laundry room, doing his laundry. Sarah tried to call the police, but the phone wasn't working, so she went next door to use their phone instead. I don't remember all the details clearly, but they somehow kept him in the house until the police came and took him away. It turns out, this guy had been getting into the house somehow and had been staying in the attic. The police found a small hole in the attic above Sarah's bedroom, where he had been watching her. On that day, he cut the phone lines and hid a knife under her pillow. We can only imagine what might have happened if she had been alone when she got home, but luckily, she wasn't. I don't know much else about the guy except that the police took him away, and he probably went to jail. 2 days ago, in the southwest part of Sweden, something happened. It was about 5 o'clock in the evening. I wanted to see my friend. We both have mopeds, scooters. We went to the store to get something to eat for our little trip. Then we went to a nice field with sheep. I went there before and wanted to go again. It was about 15 minutes from the middle of our town. Then I reached a small road surrounded by trees. No vehicles usually go there, so I drove in the middle of the road, sometimes even on the side meant for cars coming from the opposite direction. Then I checked my mirror and saw my friend driving near the edge of the road. At first, I thought she wanted to show me I should stay on my side of the road, but then she got really close to the edge and almost fell into a ditch. I stopped and waited for her to catch up. We both laughed, and I asked her what happened. She said she got distracted by something strange on a tree next to the road and forgot to turn. We laughed and continued our journey. Later, we sat in the sheep field eating our snacks. For some reason, we started talking about it again. I asked her what she saw. She described a wooden plank nailed to a tree, looking like a figure. It had holes for eyes, like a person. My reaction was, "That's really creepy." We decided to find it again on our way back home. We stopped by the road, and I turned off the engine. When I looked up, I saw it immediately. It really gave me the chills. It was hanging in a tree, looking lifeless. I decided to take a picture of it as we drove back home. When I saw it, my thoughts went straight to cults that put up some kind of sign to show where they've been, or a hint that they're about to make a move. I don't think I'll go there again, and I'm not sure what it could be, but it just didn't feel right. My name's Lucas, and I'm 16. I live near the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania. When I was younger, we often visited my uncle's cabin in the mountains for hunting trips. There's a long road that goes up to the cabin, and there's a big parking area with a bright light shining on it. This happened in late November. The night before the first day of whitetail buck season, we had our usual gathering at the cabin. There was a lot of drinking, so I stepped away from it and went outside for a smoke. As I walked out, I heard a strange sound. It was like an animal in trouble mixed with a creepy laugh, which I'll never forget for the rest of my life. I get scared easily, so I hurried back inside. Everyone else went to sleep, but I stayed awake. I was thinking about random stuff when I heard that same scary noise again. It made me uneasy. Eventually, I fell asleep and woke up the next morning ready to go hunting. After we finished hunting, I forgot about the scary noise. When night came, the older folks were drinking a lot again, so I just stayed on my phone. One of the guys went outside for a smoke and didn't return for a while, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. My dad asked me to go see if he was okay. As I went outside, I saw him standing by my dad's car. I said, "Hey, we were wondering where you went." But then, I got really scared when I heard a voice behind me saying, "Oh, sorry. I was looking for my playing cards in my truck." I turned around and saw him walking towards me. When I looked back at my dad's car, nobody was there. I didn't want to seem foolish in front of everyone else, so I only mentioned it to my dad. He said it was probably just the shadow of a tree or something. The next morning, we heard a gunshot, and we found out my uncle had shot a deer. We helped him gather it, clean it, hang it up, and cut it into pieces. Then they all celebrated by drinking more beer, and I felt left out again. It was about 4 p.m., so we were getting ready to eat the deer my uncle had shot. Then my uncle said something strange. He said, "That's odd. I thought I put the chops on the grill to cook." But he brushed it off, thinking it was just a coyote or something. So we had our dinner, and once again, it was bedtime. I still couldn't sleep, so I stayed up playing games on my phone. I forgot to say, whenever my uncle shoots a deer, he throws all the guts into a pit we call the feeding trough for the coyotes in the area. It's his way of giving back to wildlife, I guess. So I was lying in bed when I heard that same noise again. It sounded further away, and I wasn't too scared to go outside and see if I could figure out what was making that creepy noise. I peeked out the front door and saw it. It was on all fours, munching on guts from the feeding trough. At first, I thought it was a coyote, but then it stood up and stared right at me. I couldn't see its face, but I noticed shadows on top of its head that I thought were horns. I froze, scared it might charge at the door. It stared at the cabin for about a minute before disappearing. It didn't walk away. It just vanished. I told my dad what happened the next morning, but he still didn't believe. Maybe it was a skinwalker or a wendigo, but I could never be sure. It still gives me the chills when I think about it. Even though my uncle sold that cabin, I'll never go back to those mountains again.